Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a review of the Sigma 60 to 600 millimeter f4.5 to 6.3 sport lens. Now, I took this out to the zoo and I tested it on 2 different cameras. Currently, I have the version dedicated to go on the Canon, so it's an EF mount. They also make it in Sigma mount for those people who own Sigma, as well as the Nikon F mount, which means it would adapt onto the new Z6 and Z7 with the F to Z adapter. Now, being that I said adapter, I used this lens adapted on the EOS R for some of the shots, and I also used the Canon 6D Mark II. I started off with the 6D Mark II and then switched over to the EOS R because I felt more comfortable using that, and there was no difference in anything between using both. So there's no issues between using it natively on this camera or using it adapted on the EOS R. Now at the zoo, I handheld this camera and lens combination because I didn't take a monopod because I felt like it would be easier for me to maneuver and shoot around and shoot the birds and shoot whatever I was photographing without a monopod. I prefer shooting without monopods or tripods because those inhibit my ability to shoot. But those of you who do shoot with tripods or monopods, this has a built-in Arca Swiss plate. That means you don't need to get a different plate because it's already an Arca Swiss ready plate. You just pop it right on there to the tripod or the monopod and you're good to go. Now, this is a 6-pound lens. That is heavy. And now, unless you look like me, and you got, look at this, how many curls could we do? This is actually pretty light. I'm used to curling much larger things than this, but this is a heavy lens. Now, because I was hand holding it, I used the OS setting so that I could go ahead and get some stability. Remember, the EOS R doesn't have in-body stabilization, but if you were gonna mount this on a Nikon Z6 or Z7, you would get the added benefit of having in-body stabilization. So let's take a walk around this lens. You have a built-in lock, so when you lock it, you cannot go ahead and zoom it, and it also won't creep because it's locked in. Obviously, you unlock it when you're shooting. On the front of this, you have a massive front element. This takes a 105 millimeter filter, so those are going to be super expensive. Over $100 for just regular filters, and much more if you're gonna get something like a circular polarizer. You're gonna be spending $500–600 if you need something like that on the front of this lens. On the side, you have this switch that says focus. You've got AF, MO, and manual focus. Then you've got your range limiter for full or not. So if you're shooting things only at a distance and you don't want it to focus closer, you have that limiter, focus limiter. You have OS, you've got 1 and 2 and off. And you also have something on the side that says custom C1, C2, as well as off. You have a tripod collar lock right here. So if you are shooting on a monopod, what would happen, or a tripod, you would go ahead and go vertical this way or turn it back to horizontal by doing this. And actually, it clicks into place when it's in the center. That is great so that you know exactly where vertical is and exactly where horizontal is. So I personally kept this locked the entire time I was shooting. So let me talk about something here that I noticed when I was shooting, is that it is very difficult. Look, I can't turn this. I am trying to turn this, and I have to lift my thumb and forefinger every time to turn this. I don't know if it's gonna get looser over time or not, but it's very difficult while you're shooting to just turn the thumb and the forefinger, which is what I like to do with a lot of the lenses that I have, and I'm able to just move through the range. This is very difficult. It also leaves a nice imprint in my thumb and my fingers because it is heavy. So just keep that in mind, that it's going to cause a lot of shake and motion when you are trying to zoom and turn this, especially if you want to go from 60 all the way to 600. It takes almost 2 turns to go ahead and get there. You also want to be careful that if you're shooting against any glass, that you give yourself some room for the zoom because the lens comes out this far. Speaking of zooming out all the way to the end, you're at 6.3 starting around 350 millimeters. So that means from 60 up a little bit, you're at 4.5, then it goes to 5.6, And at 350 millimeters or around there is where it jumps up to 6.3. Now remember, at f6.3, you're going to have to make sure that your ISO is up higher to compensate for a shutter speed that's at least 1/640th of a second because of the reciprocal rule. I actually shot sometimes much slower than that rule would want me to shoot, and the OS did a very good job, and I'll show you that when I get to the sample images. So this is primarily a lens that is meant for shooting outdoors. If you're going to shoot indoors, and you're going to see that I did some shooting in low light situations, you're going to have to know what you're doing when you're shooting. You're going to have to understand how to handhold everything and how to get the proper shutter speed and exposure for where you're shooting. But just know it's going to be much more difficult to capture motion in lower light situations at 6.3 without having to skyrocket your ISO. So now let's go through some of the images that I captured at the zoo, and remember, you can download some of these sample RAW files to determine whether or not you like the quality that this lens is giving you. So let's take a look at this first shot. Now, this is just at 133 millimeters, but I'm shooting through a fence and it looks good. The background looks fine. Everything that I'm seeing in the shot, the colors, the tones, sharpness, looks pretty good. This is when you zoom into 600 millimeters. Just look at the eyeball. This is one of the reasons I showed this photo, is because the eyeball is so freaking sharp. I'm almost speechless for what to say about this, because it's kind of interesting to have a lens that is priced at $2,000 that can give you 600 millimeters and give you the sharpness that I got in this image. Moving on, this one is at 510 millimeters, but I really want to show you the next one, because that's where I shot it at 60 millimeters to show you the wide angle. Just look at the fence that I had to shoot through. I was able to get the focus here, kind of the wood of the cage in the background, but as we zoom in to the netting or the metal that's there and the trees, you can see major fringing around the edges of details. You've got major green fringing, you've got major purple fringing going on there, and it just seems that when you're shooting wider at 60 millimeters, it's not super duper sharp. It just seems to be somewhere in between when you're shooting at 60. But with that being said, at 600, look how sharp this is. I was shooting this one at 1/800th of a second at 6.3 ISO 800. So even there, handheld with the OS on at not a super fast shutter speed, it is super sharp, colorful, tones look great. I don't see any edge fringing happening over at 600 millimeter like we did all the way back at 60. Now let me just show you 600 versus 60. This one's at 600 and this one is at 60. Such a major difference. Having a range from 60 to 600 is absolutely insane. Sigma has the 150 to 600, Tamron has a 150 to 600, Nikon has a 200 to 500. This is a mega super zoom. If you go back 10 years ago and you look at super zooms, they look like dog crap. I'll say crap, I won't say poop. All right, I said poop anyway. It looked like dog poop. It's amazing what they've done in the last 10 years, all of the manufacturers out there, to take these super mega zoom lenses and give them fantastic quality. Now, I know one of the things people want to know is, how is the focus speed on this type of lens? Now, I didn't really shoot too many things that were moving terribly too fast, but it's going to be okay. It's not going to be the best autofocus speed in the world. Of course, it depends what camera you put it on, but I didn't have any issues tracking the moving subject slowly moving like the giraffes walking. I didn't have any trouble doing that. But the one thing you're going to need to keep in mind is the stability. As you're moving and zooming, as you're hand holding, it's going to be harder to keep everything in the frame composed the way you want it. So it just becomes more difficult with a big lens like this. Let me cut in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. I personally use Squarespace for jaredpoland.com, which is my online photo portfolio. If you'd like to get a 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FronosPhoto to check it out. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FronosPhoto at checkout to save 10% off your first order. Now let's jump back into the lens review. See, I love shooting at the zoo. The zoo is a fun place to shoot, and it's a great place to test out massive mega zoom lenses when there's animals out. Now, one of the animals that were out were giraffes, and I saw the giraffe, and I zoomed into 600 millimeters on the giraffe eating, and he's like, I don't want to grow up.
I'm a toy biscuit.
Does anybody know who the Kitty City giraffe was? No, Kitty City had a kangaroo.
Lionel Kitty City, turn that round, upside down.
If anybody knows Kitty City, leave a comment down below that you remember shopping at Kitty City. It was a lot of fun. I got Super Mario Brothers 2. But anyway, the giraffe was chomping down on the food, and it looked really good. And then here you see the giraffe at 60 millimeters shot vertically. Everything basically looks like it's in focus. Now, I was at 5.6, and I wasn't all the way wide open at 4.5, because part of the reason is, as you zoom, this is a variable aperture lens. So when you're all the way out at 600, or as far as 350 millimeters, it's at 6.3. As you pull back, if you're in manual focus, you may have to change the aperture yourself depending on the camera that you're using. So keep that in mind. You're going to gain light as you go wider, and as you zoom in, you're losing light, which is going to change your exposure when you go ahead and shoot manual. But if you zoom in and you look at the background again, you can see a ton of fringing going on. But it doesn't show up in this case on the giraffe, but in other images like the bald eagle where I was shooting ultra wide, it had this huge purple fringe all around the outside of its head. This was at 600. Just look at the eyeball of the giraffe. He's like, why are you singing about Toys R Us? I'm still disappointed that I'm now at a zoo and no longer at a toy store where I get to play with toys and never have to grow up. Now he's stuck in a zoo. But anyway, you don't see any of that purple fringing or green fringing, and the details and the colors and the tones all look really good on this image as well. So moving on, I went into the aviary. I don't know if it's called an aviary, but that's where the birds are, and they give me a close-up look to photograph these birds indoors. I was shooting this one at 1/200th of a second handheld at 6.3 ISO 2000 at 510 millimeters. Because I wanted to fill the frame with this bird from head to tail, and he's looking at me like, who the hell are you? What are you looking at? Don't look at me, I'll cut you. Handheld, 1/200th of a second, nice and sharp. You can download this raw file to check it out for yourself. But that's a testament to, one, my ability to handhold things, because you have to be still, tuck those elbows in, put everything just like this, but also the OS inside of this lens was working really well. Usually when you're at the zoo, you don't get to see the lions outside because they're just sleeping or it's too hot, but being that it was only 37 degrees, the lions were just sitting outside. 60 millimeters, 600. Again, just wanted to show you the range, 60 to 600. I've got everything else in between, but wanted to show you that. Moved over to shoot the penguin. The reason I'm showing you this image is because the penguin in the background, when you're shooting at 6.3, is pretty much there. Now, it's a little out of focus, but this is what happens when you're shooting at 6.3, is that anything that's right behind that subject is going to be more prevalent than if you were using a 600 f4. But in order to be using a 600 f4, you've dropped $13,000 on a lens that weighs 10 pounds, and you're most likely not going to take that around because honestly, I rather have a more versatile, less expensive lens like this than to have a 600 f4 that I barely can carry around. I mean, I can carry it because I got these muscles again, but it's just that I don't want to take it around. And I don't want to spend $12,000 when I can have a more versatile lens like this. You've got the lion who was up above at 600, looks good. Again, more fringing when you get him out at 60 millimeters. Lots of fringing going around in the edges of the frame. You can just see it down here in the brush. But I just thought it was cool that the lion was up above and they were making lots of lion noises. And I thought they were pumping in the sounds. They weren't. The lion was actually like, roar. That's exactly what it sounded like, to be honest with you. Flamingos are a great test for color. This has great color, great clarity. Outside shooting at 1/640th of a second at 6.3, 400 ISO. You can always bump the ISO up higher to give yourself a faster shutter speed. But again, having the OS and the ability to hand hold and be still, even out at 600 millimeters, is just something you need to practice with. And I love the colors, tones, quality of this image as well. And the last thing that I moved to do was to photograph the gorillas inside, because there's 4 of them. There's 2 mothers and there's 2 newborns that aren't newborn anymore. They're almost 2 years old at this point. And then there's a father silverback who just sleeps all day. And inside, shooting through the glass is super difficult because there's a big glass window behind us, and just the angles inside means that you pick up the reflections there. And I got really close to get this shot of the gorilla. You need to see the before, which looks really not very good, but when you use my black and white boomify preset, it boomified this to the max, shooting at 90 millimeters, 1/100th of a second. At f5, bumped the ISO up to 4000 ISO, and this looks like it's not shot through glass. I just want to show you this one as well, because we used my fro. When I say we, me, I used my fro to block the light in the background to block out the reflection, because you can still see the reflection going over the top. As you shoot through glass and you zoom in, it makes it harder to get sharper images. It's not great to shoot through that glass if you are inside the zoo. But as a testament to how sharp this is, to finish this up, just look at this. We're at 1/160th of a second at 5.6, ISO 4000, out at 186 millimeters, handheld, indoors, getting a beautiful headshot portrait of this gorilla right here. It is a fantastic shot. It's almost like you're not shooting through the glass, and that's showing you how sharp this lens is. Who is this lens for? This lens is for somebody that wants to shoot nature and have a massive range and is capable of hand holding, or has the monopod to throw this thing on. And they also have the $2,000 to spend on this lens. It's a very good lens. I was very happy with the results that I got. It's just, again, difficult to zoom and to turn and to do all of that while you're trying to track a subject, and I don't think it's going to get looser over time. Now, there is the 150 to 600 Sport and Contemporary. This is actually lighter than the 150 to 600 Sport. It's 2 pounds roughly more heavy than the Contemporary. The question is, $2,000 versus $1,800 for the Sport version and about $1,000 for the Contemporary version. I like having the 60 to 600. It's nice to have that wider range. Even though at 60, we saw the lens isn't that good zoomed all the way in at 60. But I still rather have that 100 millimeter option, especially that I was inside shooting those gorillas and able to do it with this one lens. You also, if you shoot Nikon, have a 200 to 500 millimeter 5.6 all the way through option. I don't know, I still think I want to have the 600 reach more than a 500 and be able to shoot wider, even though that one's $1,300. I still may lean to something like this that is a super mega zoom. Now, I know many of you have been waiting for the wind tunnel test. That's not happening today because the wind tunnel is broken. But what isn't broken is my schnoz. We're going to do a sniff test of this lens. Smells like the Australian zoo where award-winning photographer Bobby Irwin resides. That kid's a good photographer. Go follow him on Instagram. He's got like 800,000 followers, and he's really good at shooting nature photos. So it smells like Bobby Irwin's bowl haircut, which I don't think he has anymore. He used to have it. So what do you guys think? Which lens would you end up going with? Would you spend the $2,000 for this lens? Would you go with the Contemporary version of the older model or the Sport because it's less expensive? And if you decide that you want to purchase this lens or any other camera equipment for that matter, head on over to adorama.com/fro. That is the link that helps us continue to make videos like this. We're not beholden to any of the camera companies, so we can say whatever we want, and we have to give a thanks to Adorama for being a sponsor of us because that allows us to do what we are doing. So use adorama.com/fro whenever you're looking to purchase any camera gear. So that's going to wrap it up this time. I really want to hear what you guys have to say. Leave those comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And that is where I'm going to leave it. Jared Polinfronos, photo.com. See ya.